Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. It's been little over a year since the deadly tornado outbreak in Mississippi, Kentucky, and Tennessee. In Middle Tennessee, several tornadoes touched down in the area, killing 7, injuring 92, and causing tens of millions of dollars in damages. As always, when disaster strikes, volunteer and relief organizations spring into action, giving people much-needed basic supplies, including food, water, clothes, and housing. After the initial needs are met and damage assessment is complete, that's when long-term recovery kicks in. So if you've had a home or a business damaged by the tornado last year, where are you in your long-term recovery? How did the tornado impact your daily life? And what helped you make it through the most difficult times? You can call us at 615-760-2000. Again, that's 615-760-2000. Our guests for today are Alex Dorman. She is the Senior Director of Community Partnership for Hands on Nashville, powered by United Way, and chair of the Davidson County Long-Term Recovery Group, set up by Nashville Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, or VOAD. And Andrea Prince, CEO of Rebuilding Together Nashville and chair of the Long-Term Recovery Group's Construction Committee. Really happy to have you both here with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Okay, now, the Davidson County Long-Term Recovery Group is a collaboration of many organizations that work together to address the long-term needs of Nashville residents who've been affected by disasters like the tornadoes in 2023. You know, can both of you walk us through the initial steps of a Long-Term Recovery Group and what the steps that the group took right after the tornado? Alex?
Yeah, so long-term recovery is something that we start thinking about in the midst of the response phase. And so even week 3, maybe, we started having some sidebar conversations in the midst of the ongoing debris, survivor outreach, all of that initial response work. We were already starting to talk about who do we want to bring around the table, who are the players that need to be here so that we are able to stand up a long-term recovery group quickly and start meeting those needs in a timely manner, in an effective manner, and with all of the resources available marshaled.
Well, how do the needs change as the months go by?
So the first months are often there's a lot of the bureaucracy that has to be worked through.
Okay.
And so in those initial months, we're really trying to support people in talking with their insurance companies, their landlords, their mortgage companies, applying for FEMA, applying for all of those different forms of assistance. And so in the initial months of long-term recovery, we're really focused on maximizing everybody's resources so that we're bringing every possible dollar to the table. I always like to say that disaster begins and ends locally. And so as long-term recovery gets underway and continues, a lot of those regional or national organizations are moving on to the next response. And so it really starts to come down to the local nonprofit organizations, local faith communities to come together and figure out what resources we have to be able to walk along survivors as they are looking to find a new home, repair or rebuild their home, and all of that.
And Andrea, from what I understand, you're working with survivors from the Madison area, correct?
Yes. Well, for anyone who is affected in Davidson County.
What are some of the biggest needs for survivors right now at this moment?
So we're still seeing roofs that are tarped and maybe haven't been addressed yet. Home repairs, on typically there's windows or siding. But really, the biggest threat to folks is if their roof is still tarped and worrying about weather that continues to deteriorate conditions. So, at this point, the disaster's been, over a year. But if your roof has been tarped for that long, thinking about, are there other leaks, all the other storms that we've had since then? So that now we're also maybe seeing impacts of further deterioration because of other weather.
I can't imagine what living through something like this, the emotional toll that victims have been suffering and can maybe in some cases continue to suffer. What are people still struggling with from what you both have experienced?
So a 1-year anniversary can be a very triggering time. Some people are not as far along in their recovery as they would expect to be. As a disaster survivor, I can attest to the recovery process always taking longer than you need it to or would even envision it would. And so this can really be a difficult time for people, but we also are trying to provide what resources we can. We had a 1-year commemoration event last weekend. We provided emotional and spiritual care, and we also had some trauma-informed art projects and community activities like that. So we try to provide proactive resources as we can. And our case managers are always working one-on-one with survivors and households and can make those referrals for emotional, spiritual care, other types of support. And so there's a lot of customization, a lot of walking alongside the people who are affected.
We're talking about the recovery efforts from last year's tornadoes, and we want you to give us a call if you have a question or a comment. 615-760-2000, 615-760-2000. My guests are Alex Dorman and Andrea Prince. All right, to really put this on perspective, you're still working with survivors who were affected by the 2020 tornado attack. Am I right, brother?
I believe that the last case wrapped up earlier this year.
Okay.
There was a lot of the cases were wrapped up in year 1 of the recovery, year 2, and then you start to have a couple that might be tied up with some legal things or some other difficulties that case management will just continue to walk along those survivors and work with them. And I believe the last major rebuild was finished earlier this year.
So the rebuilds are finished. I'm wondering, like, what lingering issues for survivors may still exist, even after, the rebuilds were done and the home is safe to live in again.
I mean, there's always, I think just the emotional impact that disasters have. Every time there's a storm now, every time, there's that warning, it still impacts people. And so what that kind of mental impact is on folks. We have a family that we worked with in the 2020 storms and still being able to stay connected and knowing that, like when they hear the tornado siren go off, they're still thinking about what happened 4 years ago. So, that's something that's going to stay with people that doesn't really leave you of once you've been in that situation.
How are you? There's no telling when the next disaster is going to hit, when the next storm is going to come to us. And the storm seasons have changed a little bit. We see storms now at this time of year. We see storms in the spring, potentially also some in the summer. How are you all preparing for 2025 and beyond to be able to rapidly respond to people's needs and help them the way you have been?
So the Nashville VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, we remain in contact and meet quarterly regardless of whether there is an active disaster or not. And so times like this are actually, over the last year, we've been spending a lot of time looking at strategic planning, looking at shoring up our communications. How do we build a sustainable collaborative group where we're able to maintain a state of readiness, knowing that disaster season is all the time now. And so there's a lot of work that's happening, a lot of groups that are still engaged in that process through Nashville VOAD. And that is an open invitation to any nonprofits, faith communities, civic organizations, neighborhood groups. If you're interested in learning more and getting plugged in with the coordinated, collaborative disaster apparatus that's here in the community, you can visit NashvilleResponds.com, and there's a contact page where you can share your information and someone will reach out.
Are you all coordinated with county and state officials as well?
Yes. So we work closely with the Office of Emergency Management when there is a disaster. And many organizations have a seat at the Emergency Operations Center. And so we will, at Hands On, we have somebody who will be in the room with the fire chief, with the Office of Emergency Management folks, with FEMA, so that we're getting live information and updates as things are developing.
Now, Andrea, again, it's hard to predict the future, but in what ways are you all looking to innovate the way in how you help and come to assistance for folks?
Yeah. So, I think on the construction side, one of the things that we saw in 2020, we responded to the tornadoes. In 2021, there ended up being flooding. And so because we were already operating, it was so much easier to say, yes, we can help with those repairs as well. And this time around, it was having great partners in United Way to understand the struggles of being able to just, scale up your organization to be able to hire the folks that are needed to be able to do this work. And so that piece of of really trying to think strategically about how can we have the right people on our staff who have the knowledge of disaster, who can plug in easily, because maybe we'll go another 5 years without a disaster, but maybe we won't. Maybe it'll be next year. And so, for Rebuilding Together, one of our, big pieces of our mission is trying to preserve affordable housing and really preserve neighborhoods. And after disaster is when you'll see so much change in neighborhoods happen. And so ensuring that people can stay in their homes is so important.
Okay, we have a caller. We got Beulah from Clarksville. Beulah, thank you so much for calling us. What would you like to share?
I was just going to say that we were affected, in Clarksville, and actually we were driving back home from my hometown whenever we had to try to miss the wires and the stuff and the debris in the road. And one of the things that I don't think is taken into account, that sometimes the damage that happens to your home or your vehicle or something, it's not right then. It's so because we're now beginning to see things that happen to our roof line, to our vent in the attic. And then in my hometown of Newport, Tennessee, they were affected by Helene, and my sister has Parkinson, and her home was destroyed. They sent me a picture, and I said, "Is that the living room or the kitchen? What part of the house?" And they said the roof fell in from the living room and the kitchen and the dining room. So she's now having to deal with that.
Thank you so much for that, Beulah. Really, really quick, Andrea. Beulah's mentioning that homes and things that you don't see nearly like immediately available to the eye that you see that are damaged, that make things difficult. You work and you help people construct and build these homes again. What are some of the steps if someone's home was damaged? What should they really be keenly looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one, after the initial storm passes and it's daylight, making sure you're walking your property, assessing the outside, taking pictures. You might not be able to go up on your roof. And looking for licensed contractors who can do that. I think the other, big threat right after a disaster is that you have a lot of so-called contractors that come through. Maybe they're from out of state or they're just looking to make like a quick buck. And so being really, conscious of frauds that can be out there as far as, trying to get you to pay cash up front or, transferring any money you receive from insurance or FEMA directly to them without work starting. And so really, looking them up on the state's website, making sure that they're a licensed business, that they are who they say they are. So really doing that due diligence and not getting caught up in the panic of the moment of just needing to take the first thing. Also, with the long-term recovery group, that's what we're doing is helping there's plenty of times that we see people who maybe think at the very beginning, oh no, I've got this, I can recover on my own. And then maybe it's a year later when they find out there's other issues that they didn't know about. So those people, they can call the number 615-270-9255. And there you can get connected to case management and we can walk you through that. There's also, people who maybe have the contractor fraud where somebody does the repair, but they don't do it to the level that it needs to be done. And then in a year, they're having problems. And so all of those things are things that the long-term recovery group helps walk people through.
I've got to go to break. They're yelling at me to go to break, but I do want to get this in really quick with you, Alex. Talk to me briefly about how elders are being affected by this.
Yeah, so that is something that I've observed over several disaster responses is that older adults who have maybe been in their home for 30 plus years might not be aware of what the market value is. And so we have found that older adults are particularly vulnerable to contractor scams and things like that.
Okay, I want to thank you so much. Alex Dorman is with the United Way of Greater Nashville, and Andrea Prince is with Rebuilding Together. Again, thank you both for being here. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you, Miss Beulah, for calling in. Good luck to you, okay, sweetheart? All right. Okay, we're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to bring you an update on the Hurricane Helene rebuilding and long-term disaster recovery, and we also want to hear from you, so call us, 615-760-2000. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. When Hurricane Helene ravaged Upper East Tennessee in September, 18 people were killed, and more than 300 homes were completely destroyed. Estimates of property damage could reach $250 million. Rebuilding efforts are ongoing, but they're going to be hard. My next guest is Dawn Day. She's the executive director for the American Red Cross in Northeast Tennessee, which serves counties in the area affected by Hurricane Helene. Dawn, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. Okay, so let me ask this of questions to listeners. Do you have relatives or friends in Upper East Tennessee who were affected by Hurricane Helene and the flood? Tell us, how are they doing now? Have you volunteered during a disaster? And if so, what was that experience like? You can call us at 615-760-2000, 615-760-2000 to join the conversation. All right, Dawn. When Hurricane Helene first happened, tell me this. What did the Red Cross do immediately?
Well, one of the things that we do immediately is to open up shelters so that people who lost their home or have to be evacuated from their home due to rising waters have a safe place to go. That's the number one thing. We also start with a kind of a preliminary damage assessment to see what roads are open that we can get down, power outages, that kind of thing. So it's really getting people safe and starting to gather information.
How did those coordination efforts go?
Really well. We work with these partners a lot. Like you said, disasters are getting more frequent. And so we have a long-standing tradition of working with them. So they're very helpful in those situations.
Now, one of our guests before, Alex Dorman, as we were going to break, she was talking about the specific threats that elders are facing once a disaster hits that area. Is that something that you all have noticed in your work with the Red Cross?
Yes, unfortunately, that is something that we have noticed.
Okay. Now, tell me this. Once efforts move over to long-term recovery, what is the focus of the Red Cross there?
So we act as a convener and a facilitator and collaborate with our community partners. We also provide direct services to the long-term recovery programs. And that can be things like direct financial assistance to individuals. It can be grant funding to other nonprofits to help with that. It can be technical support, information sharing, and doing preparedness out in the communities that were affected. So those are just some of the things that we can do for long-term recovery committees.
Okay, so right now it's September. It's only been December, pardon me. It's only been 3 months since the hurricane hit. What stage are you all at now with helping with recovery?
All the counties in our area that were affected are in the process of forming long-term recovery committees, and each one of them are at a different spot with that. Mm-hmm. So we're attending the meetings and helping any way that we can. A lot of them are, working on their bylaws. They're working with with the Tennessee VOAD, and to get their committees up and running. So right now we're kind of like a facilitator and a convener.
Okay, so if you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil A. Colonna. We're talking about Hurricane Helene and the rebuilding and recovery efforts that are now underway. My guest is Dawn Day. She's with the American Red Cross of Northeast Tennessee. As always, you can join the conversation and call us, 615-760-2000. That's 615-760-2000. Okay, so Dawn, tell us, what are the biggest needs for survivors now?
Right now, for some of them, it's a safe place to be, more permanent location for them to be. A lot of them are still dealing with, FEMA and those kind of organizations to try to figure out exactly where they are in their recovery and what they're going to need to be able to be successful in their recovery.
How is the Red Cross helping them? Are you putting them in touch with the right organizations, the right people? If someone needs a specific mode or avenue of help, are you directing them towards that?
Yes, that is correct. We are using our resources and directing them to resources that we know of. We're directing them to the long-term recovery committees. We're also encouraging them to do the FEMA application, like the ladies before said, which is very important to get that going. Unfortunately, it was a flood, so not a lot of people had flood insurance. And so that's why these long-term recovery groups are going to be so important in this area.
How can people, anyone listening, how can they get involved and help?
That will come a little later when the long-term recovery groups get up and figure out what they're going to do. One of the really good ways is to financially, like for an example, the Red Cross, we take financial donations because we had over 60,000 disasters last year, the single family fires included in that. And then that money kind of helps us get ready for the next one. As we talked about, we all know that it's coming. So we can be better prepared.
You know, it's the holidays now. And I'm sure families who have suffered, families who are in survival mode right now are trying to think of their kids. They're trying to think of some way to ameliorate and the pain that they have all suffered. Are there holiday-specific things like toy drives that people in our area can participate in that would just make it a little bit brighter for the survivors?
What we have seen is that the groups that normally do the toy drives in our area have kind of ramped it up a little bit this year. The Salvation Army and other places, angel trees are more prevalent than they ever have been everywhere. And so, the groups that normally do that have just kind of started doing it on a grander scale.
So how long have you been doing this work?
14 years.
14 years you've been doing this work. You've seen a lot in that time, I imagine.
Yes.
Unfortunately. Yeah. I'm sure you've been able to help out as many people as possible over these years. What drew you to this work? What made you want to get involved?
Just helping other people is really important part of it. I like something that was a little different every day, and this job is definitely different every single day. But basically it was really just being able to give support to my community or any other community in Tennessee or the country that needs help.
You've seen people in their worst moments, but you've also seen people rally together to come to help dig people out of the holes that they may be in. Can you give me an example? Or better yet, tell me, what has this told you about the character of people, not just of Tennessee, but Americans? When people are in need, what have you learned?
You know, people have always truly impressed me in a disaster situation. There are those people who try to take advantage, but they're absolutely the minority. Neighbors helping neighbors. I just can't tell you all the churches that stood up and started giving out free meals. They started giving out free supplies. People were wanting to help any way they could. I think the United Way here had like 5,000 people that wanted to come and help volunteer. So it is just the outpouring of support. It really makes you feel good about Tennessee or about anywhere else in the United States as far as helping our neighbors.
Mm-hmm. All right. Say someone wants to support, but they may be hesitant to take the first step. They don't know where to go. What would you say to them?
I would say to contact your local Red Cross chapter, and they will be able to help walk you through that entire process. And it's really good to go now when it's not as crazy with something large going on, and to get training, and then you'll be able to jump right in there at the first minute's notice of a disaster.
All right. So as we are getting closer and closer to 2025, what is the Red Cross doing to prepare for this next year coming up, given that we don't know what disasters we're going to be hit with, if any? How are you all preparing?
Well, we do a lot of preparedness education in the community. And so we will be doing more of that because now's the great time to do that because everybody's more aware that it can happen in our area. So we do a lot of that, getting out, talking to groups, especially groups of senior citizens, Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, like that, just to get out and do preparedness. We are making sure that all the equipment and items that we used during the flood have been replaced. the hurricane had been replaced and that we are ready to hit the ground running when the next one happens.
Again, I do want to take the point back to senior citizens. What specific things are you preparing them with when you have these courses? What should seniors, anyone who's listening right now who's a senior or may have a family member or a neighbor, what should they know? What type of information should they be able to give them in case there's another disaster that hits us?
One of the big things that a lot of people don't think about is to make sure you have at least 3 days worth of your medicine in case you're unable to get to your pharmacist. Having cash. Sometimes when power is not out, ATM machines don't work. And having a kit that if you have to shelter in place, that you have food and supplies for about 3 days. Making sure that you have a list of the emergency numbers in case they're remembered in your phone and not in your brain. So like a lot of us do these days. And maybe having a weather radio, really just general preparedness, things that we don't really think about until the disaster happens. And so we really encourage people to start thinking about it now.
And if somebody is on top of this, has been thinking about it, would you recommend that they reach out to their neighbors, particularly their elderly neighbors, to make sure that they have those, or should a disaster strikes, they are able to help and aid them?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. Maybe even have your neighbor's emergency contact list so that you can help them if they need that assistance when something happens. And really, honestly, just checking on our neighbors and making sure they're okay is a huge thing that you can also do.
Dawn Day is the executive director of the American Red Cross of Northeast Tennessee. Dawn, again, thank you for taking time to be with us today, and thank you for the work you're doing.
And thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Really appreciate it ourselves. Okay, we're going to take one last break. When we return, we're going to look at the environmental impact of these extreme weather events and talk about prevention of future flooding in the area and planning around the increase of potential natural disasters. Stay with us. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. We've been talking about two of the recent natural disasters that have impacted our area, last year's December tornadoes and this year's Hurricane Helene. Now, my next guest is Dr. Andrew Joyner. He's Tennessee's climatologist and associate professor at East Tennessee State University, who's part of the team leading efforts to assess catastrophic flood damage caused by Hurricane Helene. Dr. Joyner, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate that. And look, I'm making this call out to you listeners. The phones have been dry, but I know there's a few people out there who have something to add to the conversation. Call us at 615-760-2000 to answer, what preparations have you made in your life to be ready for a natural disaster? Are there more steps that you want to take, or do you feel that you're fully prepared already? Again, you can always call us at 615-760-2000. Now, Dr. Joyner, you were a part of a video series created by East Tennessee State University that folks should check out if they want to learn more about what happened during the hurricane and what caused so much damage. The series, it also touches on recovery efforts and future mitigation and preparedness efforts. It's called Rising with Hope, Appalachia After Hurricane Helene. We're going to have a link to it on our website at thisisnashville.org. Now, we understand that Hurricane Helene was not the only cause of this unprecedented flooding that occurred in the area. There were other weather events that helped create the circumstances that led to this disaster. Can you tell us, Dr. Joyner, what happened? What were those other elements?
Absolutely. This was a pretty unique setup for a storm event. You had a kind of an antecedent event, this frontal system that came across Tennessee and impacted our area, certainly in East Tennessee, and then the mountains of western North Carolina. So you had a good bit of rainfall from that first system right before Hurricane Helene made landfall in the Gulf and then started heading north towards western North Carolina, western South Carolina, and northeast Tennessee. And so once that system started headed north and the frontal boundary was there, they started to really kind of merge together. So you had a lot of rainfall from the frontal boundary, and then even more rainfall from Hurricane Helene, especially with the direction that Hurricane Helene took. It kind of shifted to the northwest, which is pretty much perpendicular to the tallest mountains that we have in western North Carolina. That's critical for Tennessee because that's where the headwaters of a lot of the rivers that drain into Tennessee start. And so that's why we saw just this massive amount of flooding from these kind of two events that combined together.
Now, we call it unprecedented, but has an event like that happened before?
Certainly events like this have happened before, but not in anyone's lifetime that's living in this area right now. Certainly we see, how river systems work, how watersheds work. They move and form and change with these big events. And so certainly large flood events like these have happened before. They've shaped the rivers in our area for why they are where they are. And a lot of flooding has produced very fertile farmland along those rivers. And so it's part of the natural process, but this was quite rare. A lot of people with the data that we're looking at, really looking at a one in 2,000 event or 2,000-year event. In other words, so quite rare.
Wow. Now, right after the storm hit, you and the team were able to almost immediately deploy drones to survey the area. What did the footage tell you, and what did it initially help with?
It was really devastating to see. We were able to get out there really quickly, working directly with the Washington County and Johnson City Emergency Management Agency and a lot of other partner organizations that came in from all across the state, from other states. Really good coordinated effort. We were able to get out there. Our first priority was looking at some of the damaged infrastructure, and certainly there were communities that were cut off because of a lot of bridges that went out. And so some places, you couldn't even get to certain areas. And so you're worried about medical supplies, food, just your necessities to certain people as well. And so really trying to figure out where have these bridges been destroyed, or are there certain bridges that may not have been destroyed, but they've been impacted in other ways? And so getting as much information from the air as possible at those bridges and those locations of critical infrastructure is what we were able to do first, and then provide that information to the emergency managers, to the county mayor, and to other decision makers so they can really assess the situation and what steps they need to take next.
Now, I've lived in Nashville for just over 3 years. And before I moved out here, and when I got here, I was told tornado season happens March and April. But since I've lived here, we've had a tornado in December. What is causing the tornado season to move or be active more during colder months now? What's causing this?
Well, really long term, yes, the peak or the most tornadoes that you see would be that March, April window in the spring. But we do have a second peak of not quite as high as the spring, but another peak November, December. And so it's not that atypical for us to have tornadoes this time of year. But certainly, and I was listening earlier to talking about the outbreaks in March of 2020, but then we've had several outbreaks in December. We had December 2021 as well, kind of northwest Tennessee into Kentucky, and a lot of fatalities with that one. And so, yeah, we definitely have had a number of pretty high impact tornadoes in the winter recently that's really called attention to the second peak in the year that we may not think of as much.
Now, WPLN environmental reporter Caroline Eggers has reported on efforts to convince the state to build a mesonet, a network of local weather monitoring stations out here. Other states have built this already. She's come on the show to talk about how Kentucky has done this. How would a mesonet system help us here in Tennessee?
There's so many examples of how it could help. Just talking about the events that we just discussed, the tornado outbreaks that hit Northwest Tennessee and Southwest Kentucky in December 2021. The Kentucky Mesonet, they have stations all over the state, and these stations are really, just to kind of back up a second, they are really high quality, real-time weather stations. You've got temperature, wind speed sensors at different heights on a 30-foot, 33-foot tower. You've got soil moisture sensors in the ground at different depths for agriculture purposes. There's just a lot of great data coming in. And you can actually get data from these systems every 3 seconds. You can dynamically communicate with them. And so during that tornado outbreak in Kentucky, they were able to relay that information directly to the National Weather Service and get much more specific information out to people on where is the tornado, how bad is it, who needs to take shelter and when. And so we've seen that be the same way with flooding in other states that have mesonettes. They're able to see in real time what the intensity of rainfall is, what the total rainfall is over a certain period of time, and really integrate that into flood monitoring, flood modeling, predicting out where we may be most likely to see flooding based on this information, so we can have more warnings in place so we can save lives, maybe reduce the impact to property as well. There's also tons of agriculture applications. Better drought monitoring we could definitely improve that across the state. A lot of people, especially farmers, get upset with being in the wrong drought designation. And a lot of times that's because we don't have data on the ground to help us confirm the drought levels. We really can only use radar data. And so there's so many uses to this system. And the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency is pushing this year with the governor's office to get funding for that. So we're going to see if that happens. We're really hopeful about it.
We definitely want to see, and hopefully that happens. It sounds like something that could really give us a tip on the weather that's happening and what could potentially come around the corner. Dr. Andrew Joyner is Tennessee's official climatologist, and he's also an associate professor at East Tennessee State University. Dr. Joyner, thank you for being with us, and thank you for the work that you're doing, my friend.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
All right. And thank you, everybody who tried to call. Marianne in Columbia, we see that you tried to call. We don't have enough time for you, but please give us a call back and we will make sure to get you on the air. And thanks to you all for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced and directed by Mary Mancini. Our technical director and board operators, Liv Lombardi. Catherine Cece's bravely handled the phones. The masterminds behind our theme music, Olarange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation does not end here. Comment and tell us what you want to hear from the show by tweeting us at This Is Nashville for the time being. You can also leave us a message on Blue Sky and Instagram. And if you feel the need, call us 615-751-2500. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil A. Colonna. We'll see you on Monday, everybody. And be good to each other.